Hi, this is Mr. Ramage, and this video lesson is going to cover the tragic story of King Leopold and the Congo. Belgium is a small country in Europe situated between France and Germany. During the Industrial Revolution, Belgium industrialized rather quickly and developed a pretty strong industry and a lot of wealth. But as a small nation competing against England and France and Germany, Belgium wanted to expand quickly, and to do that, they sought out colonies. King Leopold was the king of Belgium and believed that his country had the ability to expand and was seeking colonies both in Asia and in Africa. He wanted to expand Belgium's wealth and power, and of course, as I mentioned, to compete with other nations like England, France, and Germany, whose size was a bit of a challenge for Belgium to try to overcome. So Belgium is definitely looking to expand and develop the wealth and power it believes it needs to have in order to protect themselves against the French and the British and the Germans. So in 1876, Leopold is going to host a geographical conference on Central Africa. And he brings together famous explorers and scientists and writers to discuss ending the slave trade that's still present in Africa in 1876, to survey the area, and to go down there and to help the native people. Leopold was heralded as a great man for hosting this conference, that he was on the cutting edge of philanthropy and this movement of civilization of the African continent. And Leopold created the International African Association, which was supposed to be a charitable organization and received donations from people around the world who gave him money to help fulfill this dream of going to Africa and to, again, bring civilization to these people. But this might not have been exactly Leopold's plan. So he's selling everybody on this idea of civilization, of going to Africa and bringing European, Western, and industrial civilization to these people. Remember, social Darwinism and racism and prejudice are huge driving forces in imperialism. Don't forget that. Leopold said that he wanted to, quote, open to civilization the only part of our globe which it has not yet penetrated. To pierce the darkness which hangs over entire people is, I dare say, a crusade worthy of this century of progress. So again, all of these countries are caught up in this idea of progress and industrialization, this idea that European culture is superior and that it has a right responsibility to go out and to civilize those people who are non-industrialized. So Leopold's coming off like a really good guy, but here's the problem. He also said, quote, I do not want to miss a good chance of getting us a slice of this magnificent African cake. So under the pretense of this charitable organization, Leopold's main goal is to go down and to profit from this continent, to go down to Africa and to get himself a colony to build up the strength of his nation as well as himself. In 1885, the Berlin Conference made a lot of decisions about what was going to happen in Africa amongst the European nations, and one of those decisions was to approve King Leopold's ownership of the Congo Free State. And there's a lot of story behind how this happened, but we're going to kind of skip over that and just get to the part where Leopold becomes owner of the Congo. And he sold it to Bismarck under the guise that the Congo would act as a buffer between the French, who had colonies north of the Congo, and the British, who had colonies to the south. That Bismarck was worried about conflict between England and France, and in order to balance that power, the Congo Free State would exist between them, which would hopefully reduce any conflicts between the French and the British. So at the end of the day, with the approval of Leopold's ownership of the colony, Leopold himself, not Belgium, but Leopold himself owns 910,000 square miles of the Congo. He owns it all himself. Now, in the Congo, it was initially ivory that was the main and most profitable export from that part of Africa. So we have ivory hunters going out and slaughtering elephants to get their tusks and to sell the ivory. Ivory was very popular at the end of the 1800s, but something else is going to prove to be more profitable and much more valuable, and that's going to be rubber. So with the invention of the bicycle and the automobile and pneumatic tires, the demand for rubber skyrockets across the world. And it just so happens that the Congo has an abundance of rubber trees, and that becomes the next main export from the Congo. So in 1892, there was 250 tons of rubber being produced per year. Just 4 years later, in 1896, there's going to be 1,200 tons per year being produced. So rubber collection is going to skyrocket significantly in the Congo. In 1902, rubber accounted for 80% of all of the Congo's exports. All of this rubber is going to net King Leopold personally a fortune of $1.1 billion. Now, that figure is based on 1999 American dollars. So a huge fortune is being amassed by Leopold through the production and sale of this rubber. And it's done through what's called the red rubber system. And this is going to be pretty brutal. So Leopold himself owns the land. He's going to lease it to private companies who then are basically hired to go out and collect the rubber. And who's going to be the people going out and collecting the rubber? Well, it's going to be the Congolese people. They were going to go out and essentially work as a slave society where rubber collection was their primary function. And they had to collect a certain amount of rubber in order to meet essentially this taxing system. So they had to go collect enough rubber to appease the land-owning companies, who then would turn around and sell it off to King Leopold. A group of soldiers called the Force Publique would be used. Now, these were Congolese people, men, who were used as a police force to round up people and to force them to gather rubber sap. Other companies hired out their own militia or brought in troops from Europe. And Leopold not only owned so much land, he also seized additional lands in order to plant more rubber trees. So land that was set aside for centuries for food growth and development is going to be destroyed and stripped down, and rubber trees are going to be planted in its place. So this red rubber system is using the Congolese people as slave labor, is using a military police force to control them, to get them out into the forest to collect the rubber sap, and then chopping down or destroying other lands in order to plant more rubber trees. People who refused to go out and collect work were beaten, their families taken hostage, or their villages threatened. Companies created unrealistic quotas of rubber collection where people had to go out and bring back gallons and gallons of rubber sap, which they could never meet, and not meeting that quota meant you could be punished by death. This was a harsh and brutal system. The Force Publique soldiers would punish the Congolese who did not meet the quota by cutting off a hand or a foot, and that the soldiers had to present a severed hand for every bullet that they used as proof that they had killed somebody. Now I'm going to present some primary sources to you to just sort of describe what's happening and what it's like for the people in the Congo. A Congolese man said, "We were always in the forest to find the rubber vines, to go without food, and our women had to give up cultivating the fields and gardens. Then we starved. Wild beasts, leopards, killed some of us while we were working away in the forest, and others got lost or died from exposure or starvation, and we begged the white men to leave us alone, saying we could get no more rubber. Then the white men and their soldiers said, 'Go, you are only beasts yourselves. You are only nyama, meat.' We tried, always going further into the forest, and when we failed and our rubber was short, the soldiers came to our towns and killed us. Many were shot, some had their ears cut off, others were tied up with ropes around their necks and bodies and taken away." From an American missionary stationed in the Congo, "Each town in the district is forced to bring a certain quantity of rubber to the headquarters of the commissaire agent every Sunday. It is collected by force. The soldiers drive the people into the bush. If they will not go, they are shot down, and their left hands cut off and taken as trophies to the commissaire. The commissaire is paid a commission of about $1 a pound upon all the rubber he gets. It is therefore to his interest to get as much as he can. Let me give an incident to show how this unrighteous trade affects the people. One day a state corporal, who was in charge of the post of Lolifa, was going around the town collecting rubber. Meeting a poor woman whose husband was away fishing, he said, "Where is your husband?" She answered by pointing to the river. He then said, "Where is his rubber?" She answered, "It is ready for you." Whereupon he said, "You lie," and lifting his gun, shot her dead. Shortly afterwards, the husband returned and was told of the murder of his wife. He went straight to the corporal, taking with him his rubber, and asked why he had shot his wife. The wretched man then raised his gun and killed the corporal. The soldiers ran away to the headquarters of the state and made misrepresentations of the case, with the result that the commissaire sent a large force to support the authority of the soldiers. The town was looted, burned, and many people killed and wounded. The Belgians were brutal in the Congo. One official, Leon Fieves, was one of the worst. This is a quote from a Catholic priest speaking on behalf of a Congolese man. He said, quote, "All blacks saw this man as the devil of the equator. From all the bodies killed in the field, you had to cut off the hands. He wanted to see the number of hands cut off by each soldier, who had to bring them in baskets. A village which refused to provide rubber would be completely swept clean. As a young man, I saw Fieves' soldier, Molili, then guarding the village of Boyika, take a net, put 10 arrested natives in it, attach big stones to the net, and make it tumble into the river. Rubber causes these torments. That's why we no longer want to hear its name spoken. Soldiers made young men kill or rape their own mothers and sisters." When addressed about the cutting off of the hands in the Congo, King Leopold II said, "Cut off hands? That's idiotic. I'd cut off all the rest of them, but not hands. That's the one thing I need in the Congo." So, according to Leopold and some other sources, all of this was being done without his orders, per se. He may not have approved of this tactic, but he most certainly did not condemn it. His orders were for these corporations and companies to produce as much rubber as possible, and he really didn't care the means which they used to go out and achieve that goal. This is a very famous political cartoon showing a Congolese man in the rubber coils. So obviously that is Leopold II here, represented as this snake which has engulfed and grasped this man in its coils, in its rubber coils, because it's a snake made out of rubber. At the bottom we can say that it says the Congo Free State, with free being in quotations, indicating, of course, that it is not free at all. And it's rubber that has enslaved the people of the Congo. It is rubber that Leopold is obsessed with, and the Congolese people are forced to collect for him. And in the background, we can see his wife and child fleeing away from the terrible snake that is King Leopold II. And some images of the severed hands with some Congolese men and some Belgian officials. This very famous photograph was one of the ones that actually began to stir up some international concerns over the treatment of the people in the Congo. This is a man staring at the severed foot and hand of his 5-year-old daughter, who was killed by the Belgians. So let's take a look at the impact of Leopold's rule in the Congo. Congolese people are going to suffer greatly during Leopold's rule over the Congo Free State. And it's not just from the cutting off of the hands, and it's not just from the rubber collection and the torture and the murders. Because there was so much emphasis on collecting rubber, food production decreased significantly. And with less food, there's going to be malnutrition and disease spreading around the people of the Congo Free State. Now, there's no accurate numbers or census, but some historians estimate that somewhere between 2 to 20 million people died in the Congo in just 10 years' time. Now, the end of Leopold's rule comes a little bit later on, but reports about the conditions in the Congo get out as early as 1890. American George Washington Williams is going to describe the conditions in the Congo as, quote, crimes against humanity, which is the first time that phrase has been used. Protests and investigations are going to continue. Leopold attempted to silence and discredit his attackers. He tried to pay people off and bribe people to report positive stories about what he was doing because he didn't want the truth to get out. Eventually, after a lot of discussion and debate, in 1908, the Belgian government is going to officially annex the territory, and it became now the Belgian Congo and will come under control of the Belgian government. Remember, previous to this, it had been a colony owned by Leopold himself. Now it's going to go over to the Belgian government, and they will now run the Congo. Now, this is an example of some pretty terrible stuff that's going to happen in Africa during this colonial period, but by no means is it the only example. In 1904 to 1907, Germany is going to carry out a genocide against the native people of what is now present-day Namibia. They're going to wipe out about 80% of the Herero people and about 50% of the Nama people, in total killing an estimated 80,000. And this belief in racial superiority that we see used by the Belgians and the Germans and other European countries in their colonies in Africa is going to lead to terrible treatment of the African people by European colonists. I encourage you to go out and learn more about imperialism in Africa. This is just a little bit of information that's out there. I hope you learned something today. Thanks for watching.